So fresh out of nursing school, I accepted a job in pediatric oncology. I didn't know much about it. In fact, the extent of my knowledge was what I had seen on things like St. Jude commercials. I'm thankful that I didn't give it a second thought, though, because I probably would have declined the offer for fear of it being too hard. That chapter, that 10-year chapter of my life, is what I credit for the nurse that I am today. I'm so thankful for those tiny patients. They were mighty warriors, and their parents and my coworkers, the whole team, they helped to shape me, and it's because of them that I can speak about death and dying without shuddering. You might be thinking, what about the kids that lived? Yes, research has come so far, and kids are beating cancer, but that'll be another talk for another day. So from there, I entered the world of hospice nursing, and primarily for geriatric patients in rural areas, and now currently am doing surgical nursing. So I guess I'm the friend that everyone wants to have. If you're sick, you can call me, or if your kid is sick, but I quickly become the friend that no one wants to talk to because I talk about things that are hard to hear. Now, those St. Jude commercials, they didn't show things like the nurses performing post-mortem care. They didn't show the nurses wheeling a deceased child to the morgue. So I guess it's safe to say from the very first day of my nursing career, I was forced to face the searing reality of death. I'd like for you to capture your emotions when you see these words or if you hear them out loud. It's kind of taboo in our country to talk about these things. So I believe the first step in transforming this conversation is to acknowledge how you feel about this topic of death. So I encourage you to examine how you feel, to allow yourself to feel it, and to just most importantly, think about it and speak about it. This is a birth plan. Some of you may be familiar with this. It seems to be common practice in this country for expectant parents to carefully formulate a plan for how they hope the birth of their child will go. It includes things like where the birth will take place, who will be in the room, pain control, things like that. We plan, anticipate, and celebrate one's entrance in the world. Is it possible to do the same with one's exit? What's your first reaction when you see this picture? Probably something like, oh, a new baby came into the world. The other day, a patient's daughter, her caretaker, this is an elderly hospice patient, her daughter sent me a picture of her mother in the final days of her life, laying in her hospital bed. She had put makeup on her and curled her hair. She looked so peaceful. And that picture brought me back to those many hours I had stood at her bedside, speaking with both of them, coming up with a death plan, talking about what the end could be like, talking about comfort medicines, moving furniture so that the hospital bed could be in the living room, so that the natural light could come in the windows, so that her mother could still hear the family interacting in the kitchen, so that she could look out the window and see the farm animals. My first reaction to that picture was, oh, that is beautiful. And it's beautiful because that family was able to begin the grieving process and without guilt, because they were able to participate in her mother's death plan of helping her exit this world with peace. Once you think about and how you feel about death and dying and that subject, I think it is so important to not only think about it, but to speak about it, and eventually to put it in writing. It is so important that your next of kin knows what your wishes are. If that is not the person that you want to execute healthcare decisions for you, then appoint someone. Because someone making those decisions for you, if they have to do that under duress and stressful times, it's so much harder. So please start the conversation today. Just start with simple things and thinking about organ donation, and then expanding your thought to life-sustaining measures, how you feel about those types of things, and eventually put it in writing or let your next of kin know. There's so many resources about this topic to help you out. So I'm going to speak briefly about hospice because this is a group of people that it is a guarantee that people are talking to them about death and dying. Now, my experience in hospice is that it is a very underutilized resource, and these statistics show you that. It is a 100% Medicare-covered benefit. Many people are not utilizing this resource. The benefits of hospice are that you get a whole team of people to walk alongside your family and provide a multidisciplinary approach and a very holistic approach. And when I see things like someone is on hospice for one day, that tells me that we aren't doing a good enough job of bringing up this conversation early enough in someone's life. Someone should not be coming onto hospice while they're actively dying. That is a crisis. The topic of death and dying needs to be discussed in the beginning of one's illness if it looks like it's going to be a chronic or terminal illness. Doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals, I've learned, are not always comfortable discussing these topics. So I just encourage you again to have this conversation, at least in your own mind, so that if your family member or loved one gets to the point where they are having to make difficult decisions, you already are prepared to have this discussion. I think that things like fear and just not being comfortable with the topic are what hinder us. There's guilt, not wanting to give up, hoping for a cure, and those are all great, valid reasons, but I think we also need to have that topic in the back of our mind. So best case scenario when talking about hospice, a patient would come onto hospice early in their journey with illness, if they know it's terminal, so that they, ideally when they still have their own decision-making capabilities, they're able to be part of the team and making their own decisions, coming up with their own plan, and allowing the team to be a trusted member of their family so that they are able to have a very smooth experience. So remember that birth plan? I wonder if it's time that we put some boxes on there discussing end of life, because the U.S. has one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the developed nations. So childbirth is a very dangerous thing in this country. But it's also a very, very exciting thing, and I think that's why that topic is not being addressed among women. So you may be thinking, but I'm young. I have my whole life ahead of me. I'm healthy. My family will know what I want. I'll discuss this when I get older. This makes me uncomfortable to talk about. It'll make other people sad to bring up this conversation. And it will. It's a hard topic, but it's very important. So things like accidents, car accidents, traumatic brain injuries, stroke, illnesses that have life-altering complications, they affect people of all ages. What if you ended up in a vegetative state where you weren't able to communicate with others? You were fed through a tube. You relied on machines to breathe. Those are very real possibilities from accidents and injuries that I listed above. Start the conversation now. You don't want your family to have to make those decisions for you under stressful situations. This is a quote from Steve Jobs. "No one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. And yet, death is a destination we all share. No one has ever escaped it, and that is how it should be, because death is very likely the single best invention of life. It's life's change agent. It clears out the old to make way for the new." So I feel so fortunate to have been with many, many people at the end of their life. It's an honor. As a nurse, people don't typically pick you. You get assigned, and I have been very fortunate to be able to walk that path with many, many families. So along the theme of transformation, I'd like to share some ways that the mind, the body, and the spirit transform at the time of death. Now, in situations where it's a slow decline to death, typically patients will start to have a decrease in activity level, wakefulness, thirst, and hunger. And the process of starvation, if it's patient-led, research shows that it is not painful and that the patient actually enters a euphoric state. I hear a lot of family members, they have guilt over their loved one not wanting to eat or drink anymore, and that's the one thing that they can control, and they almost feel like they need to force it because they believe that is the one thing that they can do to keep their loved one alive. But the process of the patient refusing those things is actually a natural process and painless. Patients will often, in the very end, have something that we call a rally, and it's this unexplained burst of energy, and it's thought to maybe be an opportunity for them to tie up loose ends or to have some sort of closure. You'll often hear people speak to people that have already been deceased. They'll have visions of loved ones. They'll speak of going home, things like this. I've seen to be a theme across the board with the people that I've entered or walked this journey with. One woman that I cared for recently, she was in the pre-active phase of death. She was mostly unresponsive, and I walked into her house to check on her. She woke up and said, "I need to go to the wedding." She started speaking to people in the room that weren't there. So her caregiver and I got her up in her wheelchair. We took her to the front window of her house so she could look out in the yard and in the street, and she was looking out, mumbling some words. She thought she was at this wedding that she needed to go to. As soon as she got back in bed, she fell asleep and didn't wake up again. She died less than 48 hours later, and I really believe that burst of energy that she had was her rally. She had one more thing that she needed to do before she left this world, and she got to do it. I cared for a little girl for 3 years, and just before her 4th birthday, she was at the end of her life, and as she laid lifeless in her hospital bed, her mom laid next to her and said, "When you see Jesus, you run to him." She gave her permission. That little girl's legs ran in the hospital bed as she took her last breath. I've told that story so many times and I've never cried. I took care of 2 teenagers. I had known them for years, going through their cancer treatments together. They'd come in to the hospital, skateboard on their IV poles. They were good friends. They ended up in the hospital at the same time due to complications. And one of them had a dream that they were going to die and go to heaven on the same day. And she shared that with us as the nursing staff. And they did. They both died on the same day in hospital rooms next to each other. I've witnessed kids giving away their belongings. appointing their siblings or their parents to care for their dogs and cats and pets. I've heard many conversations between parents or kids making sure their parents are going to be okay. I cared for a little boy. He was so wise beyond his years. He was like a little old man. We were good friends. We hung out a lot in the hospital. And his grandfather raised him. And as his end came, his grandfather told me that his heart was going to break in two if he had to be there. So he asked me to hold his grandson while he died. So of course I did. That was his death plan, and I honored it. And I tell you these stories because I believe that the privilege that I've had to be in these situations and experience death firsthand has allowed me to have peace about death, to not be afraid, but also to just have the voice to be able to speak to you about it and the importance of coming to grips with it and how you feel. One last story, a woman that I care for in hospice, I've known her for over 1.5 years now. That's how long she's been on hospice. From day one, we signed a do not resuscitate order together, and we talked about death. And for this last 1.5 years, we've been building trust, and she is able to ask any question that she has about death. She sent me a text the other day and said, "Marian, I will not die gasping for breath. You have to help me." She was having a panic attack and was afraid that was just going to get worse as she continued to decline. And I responded, "You're right, and you won't." And so that allowed me, as her nurse, to reach out to my team, my medical director, and social worker, my chaplain, and we came up with a plan and with her family and educated them and got meds in place. And we have a plan for when she will be taking her last few breaths. And hopefully it won't be scary, and it'll be beautiful because she has trusted us and she has allowed herself to be vulnerable and honest with her feelings and be able to talk about this subject. So just in conclusion, again, I encourage you to join this conversation, start talking about it, think about it, how you feel, and hopefully we can transform the conversation about death and dying.